right. The next project is one of our projects that has an industrial customer. The customer for this is Schlumberger-Doll Research in Cambridge. The customer is here. Customer is Dr. Tancredi Boto. And this is a presentation by Team 3, also known as Mr. Crisp.
How's it going? Do you want to start it? I'm Phil. This is David, Matthew, and Sergio. We are Team 3, Mr. Crisp, which represents Muon Ray, Cosmic Ray Imaging Software Package Group. Our main objective here is to create a portable software package, software and GUI package that processes and provides a 3D visualization of the data obtained from Schlumberger ACRI detector. So what are cosmic rays? Well, cosmic rays are energetic subatomic particles that originate from outer space. Through interactions with the atmosphere, they break down and decay and produce muons. What's important with muons? Well, muons are really highly charged particles that provide a lot of energy and contain a lot of energy so that they can pierce through Earth's surface very deeply. These are really cool for density detection because they can be detected with high accuracy and low noise. Therefore, they have plenty of applications such as tomb and tunnel detection, volcano eruption prediction, and just overall density mapping. Over here we see muon tomography. In this little section here we see a volcano and the general setup of detectors and how they detect muons. As these muons travel from space through the area of interest, they lose energy, and eventually when they reach the detector, they deposit some of their energy in the detector, which gets sent to the end of the detectors, which contain photomultiplier arrays, This energy that is read by the detector can be used to provide overall density mapping such as this, or a general 2D color map which provides a general overview of muon hits above the general area where the detectors are located. So what's the need for this project? Well, currently Schlumberger is in the process of developing a cost-effective detector. What we're trying to do is provide a software package that allows them to interpret and analyze the data in a more faster, efficient manner. What they're using the detector for is density detection. This is important because density allows you to, the information from density gives you important sequences such as knowing what's at a certain area, so if the area is hollow, if it contains a liquid such as water or maybe even oil.
So here's a picture of the detector. The detector is 1 meter long. It's composed of many fibers that are twisted, and each of the fiber contains liquid similar. So whenever a charged particle passes through one of the fibers, it will light up the fiber, and the fiber will act as a light guide, sending the light towards each end of the detector. And located at the end of the detector are photomultipliers, which reads the intensity of the light signal and produce a according voltage reading of the light signal.
So what we have here is the general scope of our project. It contains two main components, which is these red lines here are reconstructed muon paths that are created through our track reconstruction algorithm. The track reconstruction algorithm's main purpose is to reconstruct the path that a muon takes from space through the detector. Up here is a plane above these detectors, which are set in a general area of interest. This plane is important in helping determine density anomalies. So for this particular case, what we have here is a congregation of muon paths towards this general area, which would mean a density anomaly towards that specific region.
So here we have the basic block diagram. So this shows kind of like our general flow of how our project will work. So here we have the data acquisition system, which we're essentially using an RS-45 to USB interface to extract data from the CRI detector that they have currently set up at Schlumberger. And the data will be sent to the software package, which will be our deliverable for this project. So in our data acquisition system, we are The point of it was to extract data from the cosmic ray intensity detector, and the objectives were to create simultaneous readout from 2 PMTs, and as well as send accurate data to the software package for analysis. Essentially, this is the general layout, and we used the LabVIEW software made by National Instruments to implement the data acquisition system. And we used as I previously mentioned, the RS-45 to USB cable interface to interact and through a serial COM port be able to extract data from the cosmic ray imaging intensity detector. So the raw data comes in and is hooked up into these nodes, one of these 4 nodes, and the LabVIEW program will serially begin the data extraction process. So here is an example of, as David was describing the detector, the PMTs are located at the ends, and these PMTs are hooked up to the nodes, and the data extraction process begins after you start running the LabVIEW software. And here's an image of the LabVIEW graphic user interface. As I said, we initialized the program to serially connect. If the hardware is properly hooked up, the computer will identify the hardware as a serial port and serial COM port, sorry. And once you update the initialization, you can do various things in the user interface, like setting up the mode of data extraction, setting up the threshold value to determine what kind of data comes out of it, and also creating the final output to be sent to the software package.
So here's the general view of our software package. It's comprised of 2 modules, the track reconstruction module and the GUI module. So the track reconstruction module is comprised of several steps in order to reconstruct the muon path. The first step is coordinate mapping, and then it goes to permutation generation, then line fitting, and then finally through some filtering. So just to remind you of how the detector works, so whenever a charged particle passes through our detector, it will cause the two fibers to light up and send light signal towards each end of the fiber, towards the PMT arrays. And the PMT arrays will read off this light signal and give some kind of voltage reading. And each of the PMT arrays have many channels as shown here. So for a particular event, some of the fibers might light up like this. So if we look at an example, like say from our data set, event 900, where these particular channels get lit up, our goal is to try to figure out exactly where on the detector it actually hit, since the only information that we currently have is just these voltage levels here. So here's a model of our detector where this is our detector, and we're trying to reproduce this particular track over here. So using the voltage readings that we get from the PMT array, we use some special geometry based on the detector to try to guess points of where they might possibly hit, and that gets passed on to our next module.
So for testing purposes, we are using simulated data whose path to the detector we already know. Then we can compare against our results and see how close we are within a certain error. So as mentioned before, we have the situation where we can guess particular points. So because it's based on the geometry, if 2 fibers light up and have values, then we can guess a certain point, like a certain localized point for those 2 fibers. However, we aren't sure if those 2 fibers are the correct way or the 2 correct fiber if they represent the actual path through. So we essentially have to generate all permutations of those points in order to figure out what the best path is. And this is a representation of it where all the blue lines represent the various permutations of the path, and the red line is the actual path that we know. So afterwards, we noticed that when we generate these permutations, we have to generate points and then fit a line through them. However, we then take the sum of the distances squared from those points to the line, and we noticed that for the larger that value is, as in the less cleanly aligned fit through those points, the more likely it is to be incorrect. So if we take the minimum of all these permutations, that minimum sum, we can essentially choose out what we believe is the best path, and we get situations such as this, where we can get something fairly close to the original path if we take that minimum. However, that is, if I aggregate all those paths for a particular event, I'll get something like this, where you notice that sometimes there's a positional in space, there's an error in that particular case. However, we tend to focus as more of a measure of how correct we are at angular distances, as in the polar azimuthal angles, such as in spherical coordinates, because at long distances, displacement of about a meter isn't that much, but angles would cause a far larger difference in particular paths as we go, say, tens to hundreds of meters away. So we tend to try to focus on minimizing those errors as opposed to positional ones. And this is an example of our results, as in the top represents the angles of the reconstructed paths versus the known angles, and the bottom represents a histogram of the differences between the two, such that the center is 0, and as you go farther out, the larger the error is. And then because we noticed that there's a pretty large error here, we had to implement some filtering where we take those average distance squares and we try to figure out if there's a point at which that higher than that will hit a large error. So you implement at this point we implement a thresholding, which allows us to essentially chop off the larger points of error. Even if we lose some of the actual original points in the center, we can constrain the error instead of having something that's, say, pi over 2 odds, as opposed to something more like 0.1 radians, give or take. And then this is another example.
So the GUI's main function is just to take the track reconstruction algorithm as well as the data acquisition system and provide a holding cell for both. What we have here is we start at the extract data function. This essentially takes raw binary files, which are data files from the detector, extracts them, converts them to a .mat file, which is used in MATLAB. Next, compute data feeds these formatted data files and plugs them into the track reconstruction algorithm, extracts the paths, so that when we plug them into this section right here, the plotting is so much faster and efficient in the GUI, and there's no delay in plotting. Statistical analysis is used solely to determine the accuracy of our track reconstruction algorithm for a specified data file. View data only is just simply viewing a data set of your choice. So when we select the 2D, 3D plotting, something like this will pop up depending on what data file you've loaded in. What we're looking at here is a 2D representation above a certain a specified area above the detector. It's user defined, and what we're viewing here is bins where muon paths have gone through. So the red area would represent a higher concentration of muon paths, which means there's probably something in that region that someone would want to look at density-wise. It provides a contour map to further help you understand the 2D representation of the data. So in conclusion, we'd like to emphasize the difficulty of providing these track reconstruction algorithms, just because the detector we have right now only provides us with two things, which is a voltage reading and specified geometry. Other than that, we have no other information. So using those pieces of information, we have to reconstruct these 3D track paths through the detector. Not only that, provide a 3D image of these tracks that will infer information about the general area that they came from. And we'd like to thank Tancredi and Angel for showing up all the way from Cambridge and providing us with a challenging, interesting senior design project. With that, questions?
Is there any way to validate or verify what you've done so far?
Part of the reason we were using simulated data was because we would know the actual paths to the detector. However, that information, we would only use from that information, the information we would normally get from a detector itself. So anything that would tell us exactly where, like the actual XYZ coordinates of each hit, we would not have. So then we would compare two results and then we would generate the graphs from previous, where I would check to see how close my angles are to that one, and that would provide us validation in terms of if we're correct or not.
Schlumberger invite you to see the hardware?
Yeah, well, I was like working with the hardware in order to implement the data acquisition system.
Yeah,
Yes.
we also seen the hardware already.
We've seen a detector in the testing site that they're currently working on with.
Is there a plan to provide, for Schlumberger to provide you with the actual data from the detector?
As of this moment, because muons take a while to gather information on, we haven't had enough real data to actually work with. So what we've been working with was the closest thing, which is simulate data, and simulate data using the well that they're currently testing in.
To answer your question, we would love to.
Great, take them up on it.
Anything else?
All right, thank you.